But that's one of those things I want to kind of develop my own the iPhone business part first as a kind of a way to maybe jump off from there.
I can see a lot of angles where you can go in this niche, but yeah, I mean, that's important to have focus. I mean, I think that's great that you kind of evaluated that and decided, okay, well, I could go these 2 or 3 different ways now that I've quit my job. I'm going to focus on this. And so, but yeah, clearly there's some great places for you to sidestep and expand as you move forward. So that's very cool.
All right, so one of the things we wanted to know is what the biggest obstacle for you was in launching your site, and how did you overcome it?
Well, the biggest obstacle for this was I didn't really know how to write programs for the iPhone. So,
yeah, that's a big one.
It was kind of, I knew about programming, although I wasn't really doing programming, in a normal software developer sense. I was more of a data analyst. So I had to learn how to do all that, and I never even really used an Apple computer before, which is required to write programs on the phone. And even better, at the time there was a non-disclosure agreement, so it was impossible to actually ask anyone online for help or to get training in any way other than
interesting.
Apple. So that was a little bit a little bit difficult. And also the way the Apple iPhone is programmed is just a lot different than any of the other technologies I've ever really been exposed to. It's very unique. It's interesting. It's really fun to work with, but it's also just very different than what I'm used to. So what I ended up having to do is actually fly out to San Francisco to attend the Apple Developer Conference. So what it really was a general conference, but it was also 5 days of training and presentations, and at the time was the only place where you could really get any of that. So I went out there to basically turbocharge my speed at learning that programming. So and then on the plane trip home, I actually ended up working on my first product, which was WinePad. So I think it really paid off. I spent about $2,000 really on the total trip, but I'm pretty sure that within the first month it made at least 3 times that. So I was actually pretty happy with the whole thing, and I don't really think without that training I would have been able to release that first product in the same time frame as I did. It really that 1 week really sped my learning up really fast. So that's really how I overcame that little problem.
Well, this is a great story. I mean, I didn't know all this, and this is really fascinating because, I mean, clearly you had 2 or 3 pretty good, quote unquote, good reasons to maybe just go, no, I can't do this because it's like, well, there's no information online and it's going to be too hard, but you made a big step there by going ahead and throwing down, obviously throwing down money enough to fly across the country to San Francisco and attend a conference, which I'm assuming had a sizable fee to it as well. But that was a serious, big action, a massive action, a bold action that, took you toward a big step towards what you were wanting to accomplish. And clearly it paid off for you. So it's very cool to hear all about that. Now, had you programmed some before, just in other senses, in other areas? So did you have some background in programming?
I do. I don't have an academic background in programming, but I do. My last job, I did a lot of programming, and in my last job, I really decided a few years ago that I wanted to go in the direction of being a programmer, even though I wasn't a professional programmer. So I really sort of tried to leverage, angle myself in my job and tried to get as many programming-oriented projects as possible. So I have spent a few years doing really Windows programming and statistical programming. It's not really like the iPhone, but it definitely is the same kind of work, really.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one thing I'm fascinated by is the fact that you weren't even. I mean, you said you hadn't really even used an Apple computer, so it's not like you were this typical Apple fanboy who wanted to jump all over this, and so I'm kind of fascinated as to why. You said that you'd gotten an iPhone and you were just really interested in making things work for it. So, I don't know, was there something in particular that really you found fulfilling in this whole idea that really attracted you to go ahead and dive in, not actually being a previous Apple user?
Well, I have to tell you, it's actually very disorienting trying to use an Apple computer when you're not, as a programmer, without really knowing the little details on how they work. It's I'm interested in general in technology, so for me it's sort of fun to learn a new kind of operating environment and stuff. And I was even though I wasn't an Apple user, I was a really huge fan of the iPhone, and it was probably the first mobile phone I ever had, which I really enjoyed and actually brought with me everywhere and actually used, and the text messaging. And I was really getting frustrated actually with the fact that you couldn't do any kind of programming for it or even buy any kind of apps without actually just opening up your phone and hacking it, in an inappropriate way, I guess you could say. I thought it was worth because I always had this phone with me. I was such a big fan of the phone. I thought it was worth learning, the new technology to just for a chance to get it to work and just to maybe to do some kind of do little projects here and there at the time. I thought would be neat. Part of it is just, I always find myself, at least with technology, I'm always interested in learning the next new thing, and I'm not usually satisfied with learning one kind of operating system or technology or programming language. So, for me, it wasn't a huge deal to do. And also, Steve Jobs sort of made a really hard sell in March, and really made people interested in the entire platform. And the fact that they had this entire marketplace developed for people, and individuals and small groups of people would be able to develop for a phone like this and sell it directly to customers, and it's I think an interesting way for software to go. That's not just the huge monolithic company that has 1,000 people working on a project, and you can never really interact with the people who actually develop the software. With the iPhone software, I mean, I've already talked to most of different people who write apps for the iPhone. I'm able to talk to personally because it's only one person or a very small company working on it, and I thought that was pretty exciting. So I thought it was worth the work to get involved with it.
So it sounds like you're a techie guy, you're a tinkerer, and the newness and freshness of this new operating system, this new idea was very attractive to you. Well, another thing I'm curious about is, you decided to do iPhone apps, but that meant, creating your new, and another thing I loved about your story is that you said on the way home from the conference, you're already writing your first thing. And, I found that that's a very common characteristic in people that we've seen that succeed. I mean, they go to these conferences to learn about things, and it's like in their hotel room at night, they're already implementing them, to see the results happen. And so that's something that stuck out in your story as well. But the other thing I'm curious about is, how did you go about choosing, the niche within the niche? How did you go about choosing what your first iPhone app was going to be? Just as far as, feeling good about it. This is something I want to do. This is the app I want to develop. I feel like this will have a demand and people will buy this. Was there a process of thinking that went on in there as far as choosing your first app to make?
Well, my process of thinking wasn't particularly sophisticated at the time. It was something I knew I wanted for myself. It's something I attempted to write when I had a Windows mobile phone. And it was a wine journal, and the reason I did it was mostly because I had an idea of the kind of the problem space involved with writing that kind of app, and I thought I could probably make it into a project, but the main purpose of that was really to learn how to do the programming, and also just to make something for myself. And I guess I kind of figured, sort of maybe trying to pick up on that Tim Ferriss book, that if you make a product for yourself, at least you have one customer. So I kind of. And I did sort of look around, and I saw that there are some websites that provide this kind of wine journal functionality that is typical of a website user experience. And I didn't really find anything on other mobile phones, but the other mobile phone app platform aren't really all that great. So I figured that I thought it was good enough. It was worth a shot. And if it wasn't the most successful program, then there's a lot of other programs that could be written. And,
sure.
And the way the iPhone software is, it's kind of simple to write. I mean, one person can write it, and you can do it in a relatively short period of time. So